Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Cleantech Agriculture, Innovation, and Sustainability event. I am very excited to talk about this important topic, and we are lucky to have three wonderful panelists with us today, Alyssa Welker, Michelle Bogan, and Virginia Lamb. My name is Joey. I'm the events director for WCS. Thank you all for being with us today and choosing to dedicate 1 hour of your time on this beautiful fall evening to attend this event and learn more about agriculture, innovation, and sustainability. We'll start with some quick housekeeping items, then move on to the discussion with the panel. And we'll have some dedicated time for Q&A, so don't hesitate to drop your questions in the chat. Just some quick Zoom etiquette before we start. You all are probably pretty familiar with the 2 years of virtual meetings, but a few reminders. Please write your full name, turn on your video if you feel comfortable doing so. We love to see your faces. And WCS volunteers, please add a star next to your name so we can see who you are. And out of respect for our speakers, please mute yourself during the call. And we encourage you to put your LinkedIn in the chat and connect with other attendees. The more you get involved and active during the event, the more you benefit from it. All right, so who are we? WCS is a nonprofit originally founded in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're now in 13 countries and have a membership base of more than 500 professional men and women. The goal of the organization is to support women in their careers in the clean tech industry. And WCS is celebrating its 10 years, which is pretty impressive considering that we're a nonprofit primarily run by our volunteers. And what we do at WCS, we hold monthly events such as panels like the one you're on and social events. And we switched to virtual events during the pandemic, but we're working on moving back to in-person. So stay tuned, especially if you're in the Bay Area or LA. And we also have a mentorship program. Applications are open. They'll close out on the 30th and more information is available on the website. Please connect with me or one of the other volunteers on the call if you have more questions. And our annual flagship event, WCS Talks, a TED-style conference event. I hope that I met some of you there this past October. And speaking of events, here are upcoming events. Next Thursday, we have an ESG reporting event. We have a panel of experts delivering a 2022 update with a focus on building transparency and streamlining the process. December 1st, we have the LA Chapter Book Club. We'll discuss David Wallace Wells' book, The Uninhabitable Earth, and this is a follow-up to his 2017 article of the same name, published in New York Magazine. So if you don't think you have enough time to get through the whole book before the first, like me, this article is a really great alternative. December 15th, we have a happy hour. It's in person. Keep an eye on our social media feeds for details. We'll have this event in Oakland, Los Angeles, I'm pretty sure Denver and Miami, and I'm hoping DC too. So if you're in the area, please look out for us. And WCS eCircle, this is a 3-month cohort program designed for entrepreneurs to communicate and connect with each other. And applications to this program are also available on the website. Next, membership. In case you're not a WCS member, I encourage you to sign up. Just scan this QR code to do so, and you'll get reimbursed for tonight's event. Feel free to reach out to me or any other WCS members on the call if you have questions about the membership. And tonight's moderator, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Julie Bush. Julie is the board secretary for WCS and founder and president of Product Rehab. Thank you so much for moderating tonight's event, Julie. I'll pass it along to you.
Thank you, Joey. Well, first up with our speakers, we have Virginia Lamb. She is a soil health and composting educator and consultant at Groundwork, which specializes in organic waste reduction, composting, organic gardening, farming, and sustainable soils management. Groundwork advises everyone from CEOs to school children on how to manage their soil for a sustainable future. Welcome, Virginia. Next, we have Michelle Bogan, a senior product manager at Grid Tractor, a startup focused on optimizing energy usage on farms through balanced electrification of tractors, pumps, irrigation, and energy storage. Thank you for joining us today, Michelle. And Alyssa Welker is an independent consultant and senior manager of business operations and account management at Steward, a financial partner providing flexible loans to regenerative agriculture farms, ranches, fisheries, and food producers. Nice to see you, Alyssa. So thank you and welcome to each and every one of you who's present to learn from these three inspirational women as they share their experiences and insights on innovation and sustainability in agriculture. There is good news in 2022. We are witnessing a beautiful diversity of knowledge, skills, and perspectives innovating their way into agriculture. Farmers, fresh and seasoned, technologists, communities, investors, and many, many others are working together to achieve a healthier environment, economic profitability, and social and economic equality. So to each of you, Virginia, Michelle, and Alyssa, I ask specifically, what are you or what is your company doing to achieve greater sustainability in agriculture? And with your response, can you describe an example of how you're doing that? So to kick things off, maybe we'll start with Virginia.
Sure. So agriculture has been getting a lot of attention lately because of its potential role for climate change mitigation. So I work with both private companies and nonprofits to help farmers adapt practices that will help with soil carbon storage improvements. And one project I did a couple of years ago, I was working for a power company that was looking to help transition from coal-fired power plants to natural gas as an interim fuel. And we worked with farmers to help them adopt cover cropping and no-till practices to sort of offset the carbon. And now I work with a nonprofit, and we're helping farmers, primarily conventional farmers, transition to soil health practices. And this year was particularly well-timed with the war in Ukraine and the impact that that had on fertilizer costs. So everybody was very interested in reducing fertilizer, as well. There's water quality, non-point source pollution problems. So agriculture really holds the potential to solve a lot of problems. And it's one of the only industries that could be a net, what they call a carbon sink. So agriculture could store more carbon than it produces, which is pretty exciting.
So quick follow-up, Virginia. When we talk about working with CEOs and school children and all different kinds of organizations in between,
Yes.
what do those cohorts have in common when it comes to soil?
So everybody's interested in soil suddenly. So I've worked with companies like Bristol Myers Squibb. I mean, not exactly the CEO, but the upper level decision makers and sustainability managers. And that ranges from what they can teach employees about what they can do in their workplace and what they can do as individual citizens to reduce their environmental impact, all the way on to what the actual company can do in terms of policy. And then down to, my favorite group to work with, which is school kids. So I do, work with training programs, and I'm in New Jersey, and in Newark, I'm working with a STEM educator who does training programs and just to show children, soil, and discuss the biology of soil and the ways that soil can be helpful to us in cleaning our water and cleaning our air, and it's very empowering for them because it's something everybody can relate to, right? Everybody understands soil. But I will say too, lastly, that there's many quotes like from Da Vinci and from FDR about soil and the way in which it's so important to us, basically, but that we really don't understand it very well. So it's kind of like you can meet people wherever they are with
Right.
it, like some very simple concepts onto some very, complex soil chemistry and so forth. So it's really applicable to a wide range of educational opportunities.
All right. Thank you, Virginia.
Sure.
Michelle, what about you? What are you or what is your company doing to achieve greater sustainability in agriculture?
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So as I was introduced, I work at a company called Grid Tractor, and we're aiming to help farmers electrify and take control of their energy. And I'm going to give a few examples of some of the problems we're trying to address. So two of the biggest ones that we've seen. So one is a lack of awareness or a lack of knowledge around the benefits of vehicle electrification. So that's one that we've seen. And the other is that we've done some survey work, and we primarily right now are at least focused, or our efforts are focused in California. We have a California Energy Commission grant so it's particularly my work that I'm helping to lead and run with 2 deployment sites where we're going to deploy electric farm vehicles, and those would be electric tractors. And so the other problem that we see is that farmers are traditionally risk averse. And so anything that could potentially affect crop yields or adds additional complexity is they're somewhat cautious around. And so vehicle electrification, it's a new technology, and new technologies take time to learn, take time to adapt to. And so that's one of the challenges that we're trying to address. So those are the 2 main challenges. One is the lack of awareness around the benefits, and that is it even possible to do all of the operations that I currently do with diesel tractors? Is it possible to do that same amount of work with electric tractors? So even just the knowledge around what models are out there. So that's one area where we're trying to close that gap. And one of the ways that we're working to do that is we've built and are continuing to build planning tools to help the farmers think about what is it going to take to electrify my fleet. And so those planning tools take sort of inputs from the farmers, like what is their current operations with diesel tractors? When do they need to be out working in the field versus when are they just parked? Because that's, there's a new paradigm around how to refuel them. So when they're parked, that could be time when they're quote unquote being refueled or being recharged. So these planning tools will take inputs on their current operation and help them figure out how many electric tractors they would need, how much infrastructure, so how many charging stations they would need, and whether their operations can be met with electrification. So that's one solution that we're hoping to bring to kind of close that knowledge gap. And then on what I mentioned about, electrification being complex and potentially too risky for farmers to take that leap. One of the ways that we're trying to help close that gap is to offer kind of a single point of contact for farmers when they think about turning to electrification or thinking about converting their fleet is, so they don't have to talk to the tractor manufacturer and the charging station manufacturer. And with electrification, you have to work with the utility and you have to work with the local permitting. So there's all these different points of contact. And so we're trying to offer like a turnkey solution to farmers. Like it's really easy. You can just have one point of contact and we'll, figure everything out for you. We'll get the charging stations permitted. We'll work with the utility to get them interconnected to the utility grid. And we'll kind of wrap that all together. And so it's really easy. And then finally, I'll touch on one more way is once the farmer thinks about, okay, I'm going to convert my fleet from diesel tractors to electric tractors, as I mentioned, there's this new paradigm of how to refuel. So you don't just bring in a truck that has a big tank of diesel and they can bring their tractors to that tank and refuel it. They're going to have to think about, okay, well, charging doesn't happen as quickly as just refueling with diesel. So I need to kind of plan that schedule out. How is it going to work within my operations? And one of the benefits of electrification is not just the environmental benefits, but there's also economic benefits to the farmer. And so converting to electric tractors has a lower total cost of ownership than using diesel tractors. And one of the reasons for that is there's a lot of incentives and rebates out there currently for electrification, but also there's an opportunity because electric vehicles interact with the grid, they can be managed in such a way that the farmer can earn additional revenue by participating in utility programs. So that's one thing that we will help offer is the software solution or automation and software management to do that charging and to optimize how the vehicles are charged to help make the conversion to electrification as economic as possible to the farmer.
Right. How would you characterize the early adopters of this sort of, one-stop shop electrification solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say, I mean, there's farmers that we've worked with that are just really interested in sustainability. So from some of our survey work that we did of farmers in California, there's ones that already have an interest in, being the most sustainable and being sort of what you call stewards of the land. And so there are those that are ready for the new technologies. I would say those are the early adopters, but probably not the majority.
Right. I find that very intriguing you say that, because your response indicates that it's more of a mindset rather than the largest farmers with the largest fleets or the smallest farmers for whom it would be, less complex to do. Let's take this question to Alyssa. Thank you, Michelle. What is it that you or your company is doing to achieve greater sustainability in agriculture?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So Steward, the company I'm currently at, we are a private commercial lender, working more on small regional local food systems work. So we provide loans to farmers, ranchers, food producers, and more recently have a focus on food and ag infrastructure projects. So an example of this is right now, a lot of ranchers that are trying to manage their land regeneratively, a lot of these ranchers think of themselves as grass farmers rather than raising beef or lamb or whatever it may be, because they're basically looking at their animals as a way to regeneratively manage their land. And a lot of these farmers and ranchers and producers that have this mindset, particularly on the livestock side of things, they need to then have a processing plant so whenever meat is kind of processed, it has to be USDA inspected if they want to kind of reach certain sales channels. And typically, because of the consolidation in big ag, particularly in meat processing, it's actually really hard for these smaller producers to get processing slots. It's just these larger meat processors would rather work with ranchers that can bring them thousands of head of cattle a year rather than, dozens or hundreds. And so often these farmers that have this stewardship mindset towards their land and the way that they're raising their cattle aren't able to then actually even get their product to market because there's this processing barrier. So I've been doing a lot of work with regional meat processing infrastructure and helping to rebuild regional food system infrastructure when, as a lot of us saw during COVID and kind of a lot of the supply chain shortages, I think one of the things that stewards really realized over the past couple of years is, yes, there really needs to be funding to those producers. But then there's really this kind of middle area to then actually get to all of us, the eaters or the consumers, that there's processing and there's packing and there's distribution. And we've created such a kind of monopolized large food system infrastructure that this regional infrastructure no longer exists around the country. And so really doing a lot of work to build up that regional infrastructure. And then I would say one other thing that kind of I personally, outside of Steward and kind of what I've spent a lot of work doing in my career, I've worked more on kind of the grain commodity agriculture, helping growers convert to no-till or different regenerative practices, all the way to now kind of working on more regional food system infrastructure and individual producers. And to me, one of the biggest kind of areas that really needs attention is just having more collaboration and conversation across the spectrum of the food and ag world, because there is a lot of polarization between big ag and kind of the local and regional food system infrastructure. And I see Virginia nodding her head there. So I'm excited to be having this conversation.
So how, so take the regional ranchers that are being kind of squeezed out that you talked about working with. Do they find you or do you find them? How do you come together?
Yeah, so a lot of growers, on more on the commodity side, the ag credit system or traditional lenders you can go to your local ag bank. It's pretty easy to kind of get an operating line of credit. They know how to underwrite that. Steward kind of exists for the misfits of agriculture that don't fit into that original kind of standard model in the commodity ag system. And I would say a lot of folks find Steward, whether it be through technical assistance providers. We spend a lot of time talking to, there's small organizations that are helping, particularly on the meat processing framework. There's a couple of small organizations, one called Flower Hill Institute that I think is down in New Mexico, another called Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network. So there's these different technical producers spread across the country. And, while I said ag is kind of a very big space, it's also a very small space. And so farmers like to talk and producers like to talk and get to know each other. And so really the network effect is how folks are finding Steward.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So let's go back to Virginia. Next question. I've heard that sustainable agriculture crosses disciplinary lines, combining biology, chemistry, engineering, economics, community. How is that different than conventional agriculture?
This is a perfect segue from what Alyssa was just saying about, these kind of silo, no pun intended, the silos of like big ag versus niche ag and regenerative ag versus conventional ag. And I started working this past summer with a nonprofit on this. It was a federal grant for no-till and cover cropping. And it was mostly, I was surprised actually, I've lived in New Jersey all my life, but there are all these commodity croppers, right? These people growing corn and soybeans and with big herds of cattle in New Jersey. I did not even really realize how much. So there's some, from a lot of folks in the sort of regenerative, organic, sustainable ag space, there can be some snobbery towards, what's called conventional ag, right? But we're working with these farmers to offer technical assistance, to offer equipment funding, to offer something also that Michelle said earlier is about just these, I made a note, hold on. Oh, about the risk, and farmers being risk averse. And farmers are just inherently exposed to a lot of risk, right? They're so much out of their control. There's so many variables and they have to be specialists. They have to be generalists. They have to be mechanics and biologists and horticulturists. They know about integrated pest management and they know about replacing a fuel line on their tractor. So to me, this idea that conventional farmers are, sort of this monolith and this one-dimensional, that idea has really been completely blown up for me. I think anybody who's a farmer in any capacity, whether they're growing vegetables and flowers on a half an acre, or they're growing 800 acres of corn and soybeans, they have to be very knowledgeable about a wide array of things. And one of our farmers I'm working on a grant with right now, it's composting and then utilizing the compost on his farm. And he knows like a whole lot about soil chemistry and biology, as well as the economics of making this project work. So I push back against the idea that regenerative ag is, somehow more interdisciplinary. I think all ag is very interdisciplinary. And I think the more we can work with farmers to help lower their risk, right, lower the barriers of entry, then they can be successful with adopting new practice, which has just been so much interest in doing. And I think that's really encouraging.
Yeah. Michelle, what about you? How is sustainable ag different than conventional ag, if at all?
Yeah, so I'll touch on that question from the kind of the world of EVs and energy where I sit. And it's different, as I mentioned. So with conventional agriculture, if they're just using the farmers is just their fleet is of diesel tractors, they have a truck probably come in and bring a tank of diesel and they're refueling their tractors, from that tank. And they don't really have to think about any other players necessarily, except for, where they're purchasing their fuel from. But in sustainable ag or vehicle electrification, and, when you're electrifying the tractors, there's that intersection with the utility sector. And so they need to start thinking about how to manage their energy, how to recharge the tractors. And there's that, intersection with the electricity grid. So it adds a new paradigm. So there is some new learning there that needs to take place.
Mm-hmm. All right, Alyssa, you're up.
Yeah, and I think similar to what Virginia was saying, I think every farmer across the board, I grew up in Missouri, kind of grew up around more corn and soybeans, and then studied environmental science and kind of moved to more of the small regional food systems. And the types of information that those different scale of farmers have to know is just completely different. If you're farming 1,000 acres in the Midwest of corn and soybeans, there's like a lot of mechanical work that you have to know how to do. Grain marketing is a whole nother world that's like kind of like playing the stock market if you're trying to understand hedging futures and kind of how the corn and soybean market works. And so there's a whole slew of issues there that really takes kind of a lot of knowledge and understanding. And then if you kind of go to the smaller scale producers, they don't have the traditional subsidized crop insurance that a lot of the larger producers have. And so that's, a different issue that they have to figure out. Similarly, they don't have a lot of banks that understand a 1/2 an acre cut flower farm and how the economics of that work. So I think there's farmers in general have to be entrepreneurs and have to understand like such a wide array of like know-how or surround themselves with people that can help them with that. It's just, I think, different types of things that they have to be aware of. But in general, I think agriculture in our food system is such a system, and that kind of all the way down to the farmer requires kind of a systems level thinking to how they're managing their operation.
Nice. Thank you. We're going to pause for just a moment. I'm going to queue up my colleague at WCS, Cassandra Morales, who is monitoring the questions that I can see are popping up in the chat. So Cassandra, if you want to unmute and maybe pop a question out here for our 3 panelists. Any good juicy ones for us?
Yeah, there's one directed to all panelists that we got in the chat that says, to what extent is quote unquote big ag adopting green agricultural methods and technologies? And then what is the incentive to change?
Anybody? Alyssa, you want to start?
Yeah, I saw us both smiling at that question. I'm sure we both have strong feelings about this. Yeah, I think having worked on, in very different sizes of agriculture, I think it's going to take changes in all sorts of systems to actually get to where we need to be from an environmental perspective in agriculture. I personally think that the corn and soybean paradigm that we have, the grain paradigm that we have in the Midwest in the US is going to look drastically different 30 years from now. I have family members that are farmers that every day I say, like the corn and soybean markets, like it's just not going to exist in the same way it does today. But I think, that being said, I think that there is a lot of progress being made on a large scale in terms of, no-till agriculture or these specific practices or planting riparian buffer zones around waterways. There's definitely on an individual practice level, I think more awareness with these really large grain farmers in the Midwest or, in the Great Plains that are adopting these practices and having more awareness of it. As well as I would say like very slowly, but it's happening at a policy level, really starting to incorporate, I think a lot of policy historically has almost encouraged bad practices, not intentionally, but, the way the crop insurance program works and kind of sometimes planting or having to spray a certain amount in order to actually get your payout on that crop. I think some of those policy level changes are starting to happen. So I think, from the foodie, small ag side of me, sometimes I'm like, it's greenwashing, it's not making a difference. But then from the side of me that has worked in that space, I also look at, okay, if you're changing that many thousands of acres across the country and adding riparian buffer zones and no-till and putting cover crops on, that makes a really big difference. So I do think that big ag is making moves in that space.
Virginia, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you do read some pretty encouraging stuff these days about like 50% of all farmers are doing some degree of cover cropping. And I mean, and they're motivated by different things. They're motivated by soil erosion. They're motivated by, like in Iowa, there was massive groundwater contamination problem from phosphates, from fertilizers. So, and now, like I said, this summer, fertilizer prices, fuel prices were really high for farmers. So, I knew one guy, he planted red clover last year, and he was able to cut his nitrogen fertilizer by a third. So that's big stuff. That's big impacts. Is he still using chemicals? Yeah. Is he still doing conventional, a lot of conventional practice? He is. But I feel like everything matters, as Alyssa said. There's also transitions going on where, again, with the Ukraine, so Ukraine, biggest producer of wheat and sunflowers. So farmers are talking about shifting their cropping, because corn and soy isn't food. They're not really growing food. They're growing ingredients, they're growing feed, they're growing fuel, basically ethanol. So people are talking about, can we maybe grow lentils? Could we maybe grow some wheat? So there's definitely changes happening, and those big systems that are, propped up for growing corn and soy, I think those are in question. So I think there's transitions going on in a lot of different ways, and I think they all have value.
Mm-hmm. Cassandra, I see that there are even more questions popping up. Maybe we'll grab another one of those for the panelists to address.
Yeah, there is one more that we might want to touch on before we move on. It's a longer two-part question. But this one says, how are organizations like Savory Institute or others connecting with regenerative startups and promoting evolution in land management practices? And then the second part is there a vibrant network supporting new companies and landowners, or do you find this still latent?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think that there certainly is a growing, folks like the Savory Institute, and kind of other organizations like the technical assistance providers I was talking about earlier, kind of from the meat processing side. There's certainly a lot of folks out there doing that work. I think that the reality is that whether it be new and beginning farmers trying to access land, or whether it be farmers that are trying to transition into kind of like a whole different system or cropping system, I would say that access to capital in general is still really lacking. There was a conference a couple of weeks ago called RFSI, regenerative. Oh, I don't know what the acronym is, but it's regenerative. It's kind of all about regenerative food system investing. I think that's what it stands for.
That sounds like the acronym.
That's it. And I think that there's a lot of interest from folks to put money into this space. But the reality is that, agriculture in general, like, you can have a profitable business, but like, it's not like a tech company where you're going to make millions. And so I think there's still some learning and some figuring out and kind of like right sizing and understanding what it looks like to put money and to kind of build sustainable and regenerative systems that still need some learning, I think, from the folks that are interested in putting the money into the space.
Michelle, Virginia, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's definitely some big money going into ag now. I mean, Bill Gates is the biggest owner of cropland. Ted Turner's the biggest owner of rangeland. So it's a little bit, I was saying ag is getting a lot of attention now. It's a little bit of a darling, and the question becomes to regenerative ag. What will it be? Will it be kind of greenwashing event? Will it be, corporations purchasing offsets and carbon credits and stuff like that? Or will it be, a meaningful transition? It's kind of in flux right now. And there is a lot of, there's a lot of corporate interest in there's a group called the Soil Health Institute, and they do, amazing research, and it's, it's like Walmart and, all the big producers like, I can't even think of them now, General Mills and, all these big companies that, are in the ag industry, right? They're producing food and selling food. So it's sort of kind of in flux right now. And I think it bears watching. And it's interesting to me because like the Savory Institute, those were kind of fringy things, right? They, previously, but now it's like, oh, maybe those guys had it right. I heard a quote many years ago, and it was a farmer saying, we used to think the environmentalists were crazy, but it turns out they were just right. And I think it's kind of true, right? Where all these ideas that seemed radical are now coming to fruition.
Got it. So I'm going to ask a question, maybe in a bit of imagine a rapid fire way. So Michelle, we'll start with you. What is the single greatest barrier for advancement of innovation or sustainability in agriculture? And what are your thoughts on how to overcome it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to pick just one barrier, and I'm going to speak to the electrification portion of the sustainable agriculture, but I'd say probably the biggest or main one right now is really what I mentioned earlier about lack of awareness or lack of knowledge around electric tractors being able to do the job of diesel tractors. So even that there's models out there of electric tractors. So there's a few companies that farmers can purchase electric tractors from right now. And I think just that lack of awareness that there's models out there, there's not enough models to meet every type of need on a farm. So the models that are on the market right now are for use cases that don't require a lot of power, so low power applications. And so like, if you're thinking about like a widespread of diesel tractor fleet, you're going to have low horsepower applications. They're going to have really high power requirements for other applications. And so the models right now and the electric side are of low power, but I think as time goes on, more and more models will come out. But I really think it's that education piece, that there are electric tractors out there and the benefits of electrification. So the environmental benefits, the social benefits for the surrounding communities, and the economic benefits. I think one way to overcome that is just through education. I think it's, educating the farmers, educating the farming community, and having tools that can demonstrate these benefits. So I mentioned some of the tools that we've built and are building are these planning tools to help the farmers think about, what is it going to take and what are the economics going to look like? So I think that's the biggest barrier, at least right now, is the education piece.
Right. Excellent. Virginia, what about you? Single biggest barrier and how to overcome it?
I think the single biggest barrier is for farmers to be able to keep farming, and doing so profitably, right? So there's huge development pressure here in the Northeast, and there's like, warehouse, pressure and all this. So for farmers to be able to have access to technical assistance and, financial assistance, that they can keep doing what they're doing and make a living at it. And, just like Michelle said, how to overcome that is just, continued education. I think people have sort of a dual notion to me, like there's a romantic notion about farmers, right? But then there's like, oh, this farm near me and it stinks or something. So it's like this the reality of farming, mashing up with the mystique of farming. And, you know, there's the right to farm here in New Jersey. There's like right to farm legislation where, you know, it protects farmers and their farming activities. So I think it's, you know, supporting farmers and giving them the resources that they need, including what Alyssa and Michelle are both talking about, allowing them to be successful.
Yeah, interesting. So not just about educating farmers themselves, but it's about educating everyone else and appreciating everything that it takes to be a farmer. Alyssa, what about you? Single biggest barrier and how to overcome it?
Yeah, I'll definitely piggyback off of Virginia's answer. And I spent some time living and working in South Dakota, spent a lot of time on farms, and then I moved out to San Francisco for a bit, working with an ag tech company. And I think having kind of, you know, I think that tech and kind of the innovation around agriculture is pretty essential. But seeing the disconnect between the farmers and the realities of farming and like a very deep understanding of our agriculture and food system, to then a San Francisco tech office trying to solve those problems, and just like a little bit of cultural, social, but then also just like kind of understanding disconnect is really big. And so I think just like almost like that social, human, soft aspect of bringing in the reality of farming to these tech companies that are working on solving solutions and making sure that they actually fit what farmers need and what their lands need, and kind of greater dialogue and communication amongst those groups.
Nice. Great. Thanks, Alyssa. So I'm going to ask another quote rapid fire question because I'm keeping my eye on the clock. And then Cassandra, once we've heard from each of the panelists, we'll turn it back over to you for spending the last few minutes addressing some more of the questions that are being posed in the chat. So the sort of last rapid fire question I'll ask is, to each of you, what is your advice for those seeking a career in sustainable ag? So what and where are those greatest job opportunities, or what is your pro tip?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. And I think the biggest thing to think about first is where within the space you want to be. Do you want to be on the policy side, on the business side, at a startup, at a larger ag company, on the food side? And start there, and then, you know, really start to dive into that space. Because like we've been talking about it, it's a really small space, but it's a really big space. And if you can narrow down there and then just start connecting with people.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, what's your, you know, are you a scientist? Are you, a policy person? I think there's many opportunities because all sorts of organizations are involved in food now. So I think there's, and you know, do you come from a nonprofit? I kind of come from like a nonprofit government orientation, you know, but then there's the whole other side. There's small startups, there's big corporations. I mean, you could work for Nestle in food science, you know, so it's really kind of wide open, and really whatever your particular skill set is.
Yeah, and for me, thinking about maybe first where kind of the biggest opportunities are. I think the focus initially around vehicle electrification was a lot in the passenger vehicle space, and a lot of innovation has happened there. But I think there's a lot more opportunities to happen in the medium and heavy duty vehicle space, which is maybe more difficult to electrify. There's many different use cases and different needs of different industries. And so I'd say there's probably going to be a lot of government funding and industry investment in the medium and heavy duty vehicle space. And that's where electric tractors fall in terms of types of vehicles. I'd say for getting into this space, I think kind of similar to what Alyssa and Virginia said, just talking with people. I mean, joining groups like Women in Cleantech and Sustainability, just to learn more about the industry, learn more about the space, just, you know, networking and meeting people as much as possible to, you know, see what you're most interested in. I think a lot of skills from other industries are transferable. I mean, there's a lot to learn, but depending on what you want to, where you want to get involved, a lot of skills are transferable. And I'm also happy to connect with anyone. I'll put my contact information in the chat before we close, but I'm happy to connect with anyone that's interested in particularly the electrification piece of agriculture. And if you're interested in learning more, happy to chat about that.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Cassandra to pose any other questions from the chat.
Great, thank you, Julie. There is actually one question in the chat that ties to what point that Michelle spoke about, but I think would be helpful for the panel to address. Is the person mentioned that someone had mentioned access to capital. She was wondering, what are the most effective sources? Are they now grant-based or loan-based, or where can landowners best access capital when it's available?
I think we're
Yeah.
assuming it's kind of like a combination of you need, it can't just be a loan because then you'll be over leveraged. It can't just be equity because it's really hard to raise equity. There's actually USDA, there's actually a ton of government money and more money going into government grants in the agriculture space, particularly, the Climate Smart Commodities program and kind of transitioning to a more regenerative and sustainable future. So I would say everything, all of the above is needed to really fill the funding gap, including conservation easements and some other kind of alternative creative sources of capital.
Michelle, were you gonna, you look like you were gonna say something.
I was actually going to pass it to Alyssa, and so I think that she had touched on that question. So great job. I don't have anything else to add there. I'll turn it to you, Virginia, if you have something.
Just again with that, Alyssa mentioned the Climate Smart Commodities money, all this federal money, USDA money coming out, and there were some massive. It was $3 trillion, and the first funding round just came out, and I thought there was a mistake that there were so many zeros on some of these awards. There were, $30 million, and there were all these consortias, right? There were like the Nature Conservancies involved in a lot of them, for instance. So all these groups have recently gotten this infusion of money. So a lot of them are hiring, So you know what? I am admittedly not a social media person, back to the sort of the job thing. But I think LinkedIn is really useful. If you put those keywords in your line, I get a lot of job stuff, and people are looking for and just connections with people who are working in this area. So I think that's really useful. But yeah, there's a lot of money around. I would say though too that it's not exactly so accessible by farmers, again. So if hopefully organizations get it that are providing support to farmers, that's great. But farmers definitely they don't have time to apply for grants. I helped a farmer with a 50-page value-added producer grant, which he was perfectly tailored for, $100,000 grant, and he did not get it. And it was heartbreaking, we spent 40 hours on it. And so there's a barrier there.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah.
Cassandra.
Yes. Do we have time? We do. Yes. Okay. So there is another question here, a little bit more tailored to, again, farmers specifically and ranchers. And this says, will certifications for regenerative ag discourage farmers and ranchers as organic certification has for many?
Yeah, that's interesting. Virginia, I think maybe you might have some thoughts on that one.
I have thoughts on everything. Julie.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know where I see the certifications going right now. An organization I work with did just apply for some of that Climate Smart Commodities money to do like a regenerative beef, regional regenerative beef brand, and including local processing and all that stuff. But there are so many certifications now, from like river friendly farms to like all these different things. I don't see it becoming like the organic, like a national certification for regenerative. I don't really see that happening in the very near future.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I also think a lot of it is challenges with consumer education, like we're here because we're all interested in agriculture and we're working in this space or interested in this space, and everybody eats. So I'm a firm believer that everybody's a participant in our food and ag system, but not everybody is gonna understand every single certification and label and like think about it when they go to the grocery store. So more of like a comment on certifications in general is it does become challenging when you have like certification overload, and like consumers just aren't going to know what that means at some point.
Yeah. So I have a question for each of you. As we kind of get closer to the end of our hour here together, for those of us who are not yet in the sustainable ag business, or maybe never actually will be beyond being eaters and buyers of agricultural products, what can we do to accelerate sustainability in agriculture? Michelle, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think for folks not in the sustainable agriculture sector, and I'm going to tie it again back to sort of my niche in the space on electrification, just helping spread the word about benefits, whether it's for electrification, whether it's for regenerative agriculture, new and innovative practices in soil management. I think anything that cuts across sustainable ag, just helping spread the word about that to farmers or to the farming community. I think that could be done by, participating in professional societies and hosting forums like this one, but also maybe directed forums to the end user, so the farmers or the farming community. And volunteer, I guess, is one way if you're not directly working in the industry. Maybe kind of all those things, I think, is, as much as you can do to spread education about benefits of sustainable practices in agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Virginia, what about you? Or Alyssa, go ahead. You were quicker to the draw with the mute button.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in addition to like purchasing food and how you eat, like grow some herbs, get some soil, and like plant a seed and just participate in the process. I think it's so easy to be very disconnected. And so just grow something and eat it. And there's a lot of joy in that.
Yeah. Virginia.
Yeah, I agree. I always say just grow anything, right? Grow some basil. And then you kind of understand what farmers are up against. So yeah, and I just echo what these guys both said, just like professional organizations like in the Northeast, there's the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, which is a lot of consumer and it's all across, it's not just farmers, right? It's about supporting organic agriculture, for instance. And then, as I just said before, kind of if you have farmers in your vicinity, support them. Go to them, go to farmers markets. Avoid the middleman, and just support what they're doing if you value them. I mean, in New Jersey, we had a very big vegetable grower go out of business this year, like a 50-year vegetable farmer, and they just said that was it. They couldn't make a profit anymore. So it's like you don't know what you got till it's gone. We have to support the local farmers as we can, I think.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, with that, I will turn things back over to our host, Joey, to bring it home.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our speakers. This was really incredible and just so eye-opening and educational. And we greatly appreciate your time and you sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to Julie for moderating this discussion. This time really flew by for me. I was jotting down notes the whole time. But I also want to say a big thank you to our volunteers. We couldn't have these events without the volunteers behind it. And you can scan this QR code here if you're interested in volunteering. You'll send a message over to Kirpa and Oakley and they'll get you set up and pointed in the right direction. And if you like this event, we have more. Mark your calendars for the ESG reporting event that we have next week, followed by our LA chapter book club. You don't need to be in the LA area to attend this virtual event. The December happy hours that we're having in Oakland, LA, I think Miami and Denver. We're in the midst of locking down our locations, so stay tuned for those. And our our e-circle event is beginning in January, and we'll have 3 of those events. And just as a reminder, if you're not following us on social, here are our handles. And yeah, we'd love to connect with you. Thank you so much to everyone. That's all I have for you. You'll get an email notification with the recorded event, as well as a summary of the chat, so you can find everyone else's LinkedIn on there if you haven't grabbed it already. So thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.